On April 3rd, 2026, the plan didn't just fail, it died in a jagged, unforgiving crevice in the Iranian desert. A US F-15E Strike Eagle went down, and in that singular heartbeat, the mission shifted from a display of global power to a desperate, high-stakes race against the clock. This is the moment where most organizations and most leaders completely fall apart. They have a plan A, but they lack the stomach and the tactical grit for the second effort required when the world burns down around them. While the conventional machine was busy scrambling 150 aircraft and prepping 300 munitions for a display of noise, a smaller, quieter, and far more lethal element was already hitting the ground. This is the shadow world of the 1% of the 1%. This is Delta. These men don't panic when the pilot ejects. They accelerate into the chaos. In the world of business and elite athletics, your pilot will eventually eject. Your lead product will fail, your star player will go down, or your market will crater. The question isn't if the crisis arrives. The question is, who do you have on the ground when it does? You don't need more meetings or more noise. You need the cold, surgical execution that only comes from a second effort mindset. Selection for the unit isn't a test of how much you can lift or how fast you can sprint. It is a calculated demolition of the ego to find the man who remains when everything else is stripped away. At the heart of this process is the long walk. It's a 40-mile trek through the brutal elevation of the Appalachian Mountains. You carry a 50-pound ruck, a compass, and a map. But here's the catch. The instructors never tell you where the finish line is. Most people can work hard when they see the light at the end of the tunnel, but an elite operator and an elite leader must be able to find a second, third, and fourth effort when the tunnel feels bottomless. In your organization, you likely hire based on a resume or a set of polished interview answers. But a resume won't tell you what a person does at mile 38 when the rain is pouring and their body's screaming for them to quit. At the second effort mindset, we don't look for the most talented person in the room. We look for the one who finishes the walk, adjusts their gear, and asks, "What's next?" That is the standard of the unit, and it's the only standard that survives a crisis. Once a candidate survives the long walk, the real work begins. Selection gets you through the front door of the unit, but the standard is what keeps you there. For these operators, accuracy isn't just a metric or a goal. It is a religion. They don't practice until they get it right. They practice until they cannot get it wrong. They spend thousands of hours on the boring, repetitive, and often mind-numbing basics of marksmanship and movement, so that when the chaos of a real mission erupts, their response is pure instinct. This is the concept of the shared brain. When a Delta team enters a room, there is no shouting, no confusion, and no hesitation. Every man knows exactly where his teammate is moving and what his specific sector of fire is without a single word being spoken. It is a symphony of violence executed with surgical precision. Compare that to the average management team or corporate boardroom. Most organizations have meetings just to discuss the next meeting. They operate in a fog of maybe, and eventually. In the second effort mindset, we bridge that gap by demanding shared intent. When the door is breached, the plan must already be internalized. This level of synchronization is only possible when you have a team that values the boring work in the dark as much as the glory in the light. If your team can't move in total sync when a crisis hits, it's because you haven't trained the basics hard enough to make them permanent. Elite execution isn't about the big moments. It's about the religious devotion to the small details that everyone else overlooks. Back in the jagged silhouettes of the Iranian mountains, the second effort culminated in a 12-minute window of absolute high-stakes reality. The extraction of that downed pilot wasn't a rehearsed Hollywood movie scene. It was a cold, professional business transaction conducted in the dirt. There was no room for ego, no space for hesitation, and zero margin for error. The unit arrived, they secured the asset, and they vanished back into the shadows before the opposition even realized the room had been cleared. But here's the secret that separates the elite from the average. The mission didn't actually end when the helicopter wheels left the desert floor. It didn't end when the pilot was safely handed over in Kuwait on a Sunday morning. It ended much later in a quiet, austere room during the AAAR, the after-action review. In the unit, even a perfectly successful mission is ruthlessly picked apart. They don't celebrate the win. They audit the process. They look for the half-second delay in a reload, the inch of wasted movement in a hallway, and the single syllable of unnecessary radio chatter. The second effort. Mindset is never satisfied with good enough, because good enough is what gets people killed in the mountains and what gets companies bankrupted in the marketplace. It demands a relentless, humble audit of every single second spent in the field. If you are serious about retiring in 3.5 years, if you are serious about dominating your industry and building a legacy that lasts, you have to adopt this Tier 1 standard today. You must learn to execute with relentless violence of action, but you must also learn to audit your performance with total humility. Stop waiting for the perfect conditions to start moving. The F-15 is already down, the clock is already ticking, and the only thing that matters is your next move. Execute the plan, find the second effort, and dominate your environment. This is the unit way. This is the second effort mindset.